In the years after the Civil War, railroads were generally privately owned industries, which created a monopoly on the transportation industry, eliminating the concept of competition in a free market and allotting power to monopolies to increase prices and eliminate competition. The railroad companies discriminated against many different small businesses by providing rebates or discounts to larger corporations and incentivizing transport for big businesses. This practice severely hurt American farmers who weren't eligible for the rebates because of their low shipping volume. Improved railroad transportation did allow products to reach distant markets, creating an effective system of long-distance productivity. However, this innovation only proved the potential effectiveness of using railroads as a form of public transportation. Soon, railroads opened their carriages to chosen groups and deliberately refused transportation to others. Since there was little to no regulation of big businesses during the Gilded Age, the railroad companies had plenty of opportunities to take advantage of small landowners such as the Grangers. In retaliation against the consortium of the railroad companies, a group of farmers formed the Granger Movement. The Granger Movement began as a coalition of farmers who met to discuss farming methods and techniques. Over time, they developed into a political union who fought for the regulation of big business in corporate America, eventually publicizing several Supreme Court cases that embodied their issues, culminating in the Granger state laws. In the first case, Munn v. Illinois, the Supreme Court ruled that businesses of a public nature could be subject to state regulation. However, the outcome of the case was overturned in 1886 with the Wabash cases, which prevented states from regulating commerce and preserving that power solely for the federal government. As further assurance to the middle class in response to complaints of the social Darwinism dividing America, the Supreme Court legalized the Interstate Commerce Act, which created an Interstate Commerce Commission to regulate the conduct of railroad companies in addition to making railroad transportation the first industry subject to federal regulation. The law required reasonable rates for passengers, prohibited rebates and discounts for favorable passengers, and prohibited pooling of traffic or markets. Much like the issuance of the Emancipation Proclamation, the laws instituted against big businesses, while highly publicized and monumental, were ultimately futile without enforcement. During the Gilded Age, the railroad industry was the most powerful of the big business corporations. To protect their profits during the economic depression of 1873, the companies reduced the pay of workers by 10%. In 1877, they announced another 10% reduction, and mandated that railroad employees would be required to stay in company hotels while traveling, which really just meant a further reduction in wages. Additionally, they decided to reduce the size of the workforce. On July 16th, a riot began in Martinsburg, West Virginia, and spread through the cities across America. To remain peaceful, militia units from Philadelphia were sent to Pittsburgh because the Pittsburgh militia endorsed the strikers. On July 21st, about 600 troops landed in Pittsburgh with warrants to arrest the strike leaders. The crowds of people in support of the strikers tried to avoid military action, but the militia opened fire on the crowd, resulting in 20 deaths and 29 injuries. It marked the first time in history that federal troops were deployed to combat civilians participating in a labor strike. The protests also marked the appearance of scabs, or strikebreakers, workers who returned to their job without the permission of the coalition or union of which they were departing. The oppression from the government only furthered the workers' aggression towards big business. Another aggravation of the employers was the issue of collective bargaining, the negotiations between an employer and their employee to discuss working conditions, retirement benefits, and living standards often resulted in an employee being scammed into a deal that would inevitably hurt them. As a result of the big businesses taking advantage of them, many laborers wound up with 12-hour workdays for 6 days a week and extremely poor living conditions. In response to relationships between employers and employees, a group called the Knights of Labor formed a coalition to demand certain rights for blue-collar laborers. 8-hour workdays, the abolition of child labor, and the graduated income tax were among their chief demands for reform. In support of the suggested 8-hour workday, the Knights of Labor organized the Haymarket Affair, and the protest resulted in the death of 6 strikers after the police fired into the crowd. Hours after the deaths of the 6 strikers, members of the KOL met at Haymarket Square to protest the use of police force to disperse strikers. Police arrived to order the crowd out, and a bomb exploded, killing 7 and wounding more than 60 people. As a result of the Haymarket affair, anti-radical and anti-unionized sentiments spread throughout the upper-class Americans. The most famous of labor strikes during the Gilded Age was the Pullman strike. George Pullman, the CEO of the Pullman Palace Car Company, established a model town for his laborers in Chicago. Initially regarded as a philanthropist, Pullman's model town was soon revealed to be a guise for the harsh working conditions his employees worked under. He cut the wage of his employees by 1/3 of their original salary during the Panic of 1893, making them almost destitute. In response, Eugene Debs, a member of the American Railway Union, sympathized with workers and refused to hire train cars from the Pullman Palace Car Company, which drew attention to the plight of the workers from people all across the country. Soon, the strike had taken over the entire city of Chicago, and violent protests were taking place. The strike finally ended with a court injunction based on the Sherman Antitrust Act. President Cleveland sent in 10,000 federal troops on the grounds that the strike was interfering with the efficiency of the U.S. mail system. In an effort to prevent their employees from joining various unions, employers constructed yellow dog contracts, which were contracts between an employee and an employer stating that the employee would not join a union while they were employed. Ultimately, the federal court ruled that these contracts were unconstitutional because they deprived the workers of the right to organize a union.